The sky over Keswick never slept. Red-orange firestorms, born from a shattered moon spinning too close to the planet's surface, howled across barren ridges and fractured stone valleys. It wasn't just inhospitable, it was predatory. The kind of place that killed without question and buried its victims in silence. And yet Darren Hall crash-landed there willingly. His shuttle, already half-stripped and coughing smoke from a busted stabilizer, gave one last mechanical shriek before Darren forced it into a narrow descent, the cockpit filled with acrid smoke and blinking failure lights. His jaw clenched. He didn't scream. He was too tired for that. The impact was blunt, brutal, and final. When it was over, Darren popped the hatch, yanked on his toolkit, and stepped into the molten dusk of Keswick's wasteland. Dust clawed at his boots and bit at his skin. The air was too thin to breathe without a rebreather. Wind sang through broken stone spires like the wail of something dying. But Darren didn't look up. He scanned the terrain instead, searching for scrap or something, anything to salvage. That's when he heard it. A sound. No, a breath. It was not wind, not static. It was deeper than any machine could mimic, older than instinct. Labored breathing, heavy and wounded. The kind that comes from something massive dying slowly and alone. He turned toward the ridge above. Slag and fresh impact debris covered a massive scar in the land. As Darren climbed the slope cautiously, his HUD picked up a lifeform signature. Strong, not fading. Something big, something built to endure. And then he saw it. A dragon. Not a fantasy creature from myth and fairy tales. A real, massive apex predator built with brutal elegance. It bled into the landscape like a god that had fallen too hard. Black alloy scales shimmered with blood and dust. One wing was crumpled beneath its body, the other shredded. Its breathing came through barred fangs, and one eye, molten silver, vertical slit, locked onto Darren. It didn't attack. It didn't even move. It just watched. Darren froze. If it had strength left, he'd be dead. But it was too far gone for that. And more than that, it wasn't hunting. It had already been hunted. He knelt, ignoring every system alert in his suit warning of radiation, of exposure, of death. "You're not from around here," he muttered aloud. The dragon bared its fangs but didn't move. "Yeah, me neither." He set his case down and opened it. From a distance he ran a scan. The readings confirmed what instinct already knew. This creature was engineered. Organometallic structure. Combat-grade tissue augmentations at a molecular level. This thing hadn't evolved, it had been built, and someone had tried to erase it. "Son of a bitch," Darren whispered. "They made you a weapon." The dragon blinked. It understood, not the words, but the tone, the truth. Darren should have walked away. No oxygen to spare, no rescue in sight, but he stayed. It wasn't just curiosity or defiance, it was a feeling, like looking into the eyes of something as alone as he was. He got to work. He used regenerative foam to seal deep wounds, bound twisted limbs with scrap tubing, and used fuel line clamps to stabilize cracked bones. With no sedatives, he stitched flesh while the dragon growled in quiet agony. It never struck him. Not once. Darren rerouted heat stabilizers from his own gear, forcing them into the dragon's core. Hours passed. The sun never truly rose on Keswick, only burned more dimly. When Darren finally collapsed beside the beast, the wind had calmed. He looked at the creature. "You better not die," he muttered, eyes heavy. "Because I'm too tired to explain this to whatever eats me next." The dragon blinked, then slowly closed its eye. It was still breathing. By morning, Darren's shuttle was dead. The power core had melted through the hull, taking his transmitter and backup comms with it. but the dragon, still alive. In the days that followed, Darren scavenged water packs and synthetic gel from a nearby wreck. The dragon drank reluctantly, but drank. He cleaned away blood, stitched new tears, and watched as the beast's form began to change. Less ruin, more warrior. Black and gold armor like scales reflected faint starlight. Its wings, even torn, spanned longer than a starship corridor. On the third night it tried to stand. It failed, but it tried. "You're stubborn," Darren said, leaning against its flank. "I respect that." The beast growled. "You're gonna need a name." He tilted his head, thinking. "Varos," he finally said, "means ember, the kind that refuses to die." The dragon didn't growl this time. It blinked, approved. From then on, they weren't just healing, they were rebuilding. Darren forged braces, harvested power cells, and re-engineered a broken grav sled into a harness. Day by day, Varos grew stronger. Their bond grew tighter. Darren would walk, and Varos would follow. Silent, watching, choosing. He wasn't a prisoner. He wasn't a pet. He was something else entirely. By the end of the month, Darren had nothing but ash, spare parts, and a dragon. But for the first time in years, he wasn't alone. The day Varos flew again began not with dawn, but with an explosion. The last of Darren's salvage charges detonated with a roar that split the silence over the barren basin. A sunburst of red fire and smoke peeled back the wreckage of an old orbital cruiser, scattering debris across the obsidian shale like shattered bones. From within the fractured husk, a fusion cell glowed like a sleeping heart. Ancient, volatile, but alive. Darren stood at the edge of the blast zone, sweat streaking through soot on his brow, wrench in one hand, a cracked detonator panel in the other. His breath came short, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of near success. Behind him, perched like judgment on the crater's lip, Varos watched. The dragon's wings, still scarred and uneven, hung low against his flanks. His plating shimmered in the reddish glow of the blast, every gold vein along his torso pulsing with heat. Even in rest, Varos looked like war incarnate, power wrapped in restraint. Darren turned to him and called through the comm link clipped to his belt. "We've got juice, fireball, time to fly." A grunt rolled from Varos's throat, steam curling from his nostrils. 2 months. That's how long it had been since Darren pulled the dying creature from the wreckage and refused to let him die. 2 months of rationed food, sleepless nights, scavenged jet parts, and wiring repairs done with bleeding knuckles. Darren had rebuilt a wing actuator from the servos of 3 dead fighters, fused stabilizers to fractured bones, and rigged a flight pack around the dragon's warped frame using shock mesh and reinforced spinal clamps. The actuator core, bolted just above the wing base, gleamed under its reinforced housing. Everything was ready, at least as ready as it would ever be. "All right, Varos," Darren said, gesturing toward the ridge. "Let's see if I built a miracle or a tomb." The climb was silent. Darren scaled halfway up the jagged slope and found a perch to watch. Varos climbed higher, his claws digging into scorched rock, muscles coiling as he reached the ledge. The wind tugged at his frayed wing, while the newly mechanized one shivered with suppressed power. Varos turned once, just a glance. It said everything. Darren nodded. "Whenever you're ready." The dragon crouched low. He ran. Stone cracked beneath him as his weight launched forward. The repulsors on his back roared to life, trailing blue fire. The scarred wing flared, mechanical veins humming with stolen power. The winds caught his frame. He leapt. For a moment, just a single breath, the world held still. Then the sky screamed. Varos climbed with fire spiraling in his wake, His wings beat hard, unsteady but rising, each motion a declaration of defiance. He banked, spiraled, nearly faltered, but pushed through. His tail cleaved the sky like a blade. Darren whooped aloud, voice breaking from joy and disbelief. The dragon circled once, shaky, majestic, and loosed a roar. Not just a cry of triumph, but a call. It echoed beyond the basin, into the burning clouds, beyond Keswick, and something heard. It happened only hours later. 3 ships sliced through the atmosphere like blood-stained knives, sleek, fast, marked with the sigil of the Flame Crest, the Galactic Empire's elite retrieval unit. They weren't here for Darren, they were here for VX-19, Varos. The first broadcast cut across all local channels. To the unauthorized operator sheltering classified biological weapon VX-19, you are in violation of Directive 7.3. Prepare for extraction. Darren blinked. They named you like a toaster, he muttered. Varos's growl vibrated the ground. Above them, the hunter ships fanned into a wide arc. Their weapons pulsed, not to kill, but to subdue. Plasma nets, paralytic bursts, anti-aerial stunners. They didn't want Varos dead. They wanted him back. Darren saw the pattern immediately. Non-lethal, precise, surgical. They had come to reclaim an asset, but Varos wasn't an asset anymore. Darren flicked on his comm. Hey, Fireball, feel like showing them how well that wing works? The dragon didn't answer. He rose. He flew. He hunted. The first ship banked low over the ridge. Varos vanished into the sun's glare. A moment later, he came down like judgment, claws outstretched. He tore through the stabilizer fin, sending the craft tumbling into a canyon and a blaze of shrieking metal. The second opened fire, pulse cannons slamming into Varos's flank. One shot clipped the actuator. Sparks flew. Darren cursed and held his breath. But the dragon didn't fall. He screamed. And then he burned. Solar breath, chemically altered fire, brighter than plasma, erupted from Varos's maw and melted the second hunter ship midair. Only one remained. It didn't attack. It spoke. VX-19. You are a failed prototype. Return now and be granted sleep. Darren keyed his transmitter to the same channel. Wrong frequency, he snapped. He's not listening to you anymore. The final ship turned its cannons on the ridge. Darren grinned. Let's finish this, partner. Varos soared. He climbed high, higher than clouds, higher than logic, and dove like a meteor. Missiles launched, disruptor nets deployed. None of it mattered. He broke the sound barrier. And the ship. The cockpit imploded as Varos punched through the hull, a streak of death wrapped in wings and vengeance. Fire and debris scattered across the basin. It was over. Smoke drifted in slow spirals. The sky turned quiet again. Varos limped toward Darren, his actuator sparking, breath heavy. You okay? Darren asked. The dragon lowered his head, pressing it against Darren's chest. Yeah, Darren said softly, grinning. Me too. But the silence didn't last. Back in the cold, clinical halls of the Empire, alarms were already sounding. Reports filed, eyes opened. VX-19 was not dead, and worse, he had chosen a human. The fires from the downed hunter ships had long cooled, but the heat remained, in the scorched soil, in Darren's chest, in the aching joints of Varos's rebuilt wing. The battle was over, but nothing felt like peace. Darren crouched beside the dragon, fingers blackened from grease, wrench biting into his palm as he adjusted the actuator core. It had taken a direct hit mid-flight, held together now with scrap plating, willpower, and little else. You held up, Darren muttered, tightening a seal. Barely. Varos exhaled through his nose, releasing a low thrum that vibrated the rock underfoot. A sound more weary than wounded. We'll be back in the sky by morning, Darren said. wiping sweat from his brow. "Assuming I can find a fresh flux rod and you don't decide to fry the whole valley next time you sneeze." The dragon didn't respond with fire, just silence. He lay stretched along the basin's edge, his massive wings spread wide to absorb the night's fading warmth. But his body twitched every now and then. Reflexes from old traumas, ghost pain from chains long removed. Darren didn't ask. He didn't need to. Whatever lab had created Varos hadn't just built a weapon, they had tortured a soul. And now that soul had chosen to stand. Darren sat down heavily beside the massive flank. "They're not giving up, you know." Varos's eye didn't shift. "They said hunters. Next time, it'll be a leash team. Neural collars, pulse beacons, things that don't knock, they strike." The dragon didn't twitch. "I could still hide you," Darren whispered. "I could try." Then, movement. Varos turned his head. That gleaming silver eye locked with Darren's. There was no fury in the gaze, no command, just truth. He wasn't running anymore. Slowly, the dragon stood, not with drama, with conviction. The actuator clicked as his damaged wing unfolded. The fusion of flesh and machine balanced perfectly now. His scales shimmered in the moonlight, burnished black and gold. Beautiful, terrible, and free. Varos lowered his head to Darren, exhaling gently. Darren placed a hand against his snout. "All right," he whispered, "no more hiding." 3 days later, they launched. The vessel wasn't pretty. Ember 1 had once been a scavenger's wreck, half buried beneath the cliffs of Kesserik, abandoned after a mining skirmish. But Darren had rebuilt it from ruin, welding Varos's discarded scale fragments into its hull, reinforcing plasma channels, retrofitting gravity flaps to synchronize with dragon flight. It was no longer a ship, it was a weapon. Darren piloted from the front console, hand on the manual throttle, the other gripping a tattered joystick patched with heat tape. Varos flew beside the vessel, tethered by signal link, his body slicing through the upper stratosphere like a sword forged in vengeance. They were headed for Brow's Reach, a fringe system, lawless, empire-light. But rumors spoke of something worse than smugglers or raiders. Callers, new ones. Not just for dragons, for humans. Darren's stomach turned every time he thought about it. The navboard lit red. They'd reached the asteroid belt. Somewhere within, hidden beneath dead satellites and old war wreckage, was a listening post. Quiet, still, and wrong. "It's not transmitting," Darren said into the comm, eyes narrowing. "But it's alive, pretending to be dead." Varos rumbled. "Prep dive," Darren ordered. They descended like a meteor. Varos broke the belt first, flames trailing his frame as he tore through floating wreckage. Turrets emerged from beneath the rock clusters, humming to life. Auto-targeting systems flared red, but they were too slow. The first turret didn't even finish locking before Varos melted it with a pulse of searing fire. The second exploded in white sparks as the dragon landed on the outer hull and drove a claw straight through its core. Darren followed, docking Ember 1 beside the shattered node. He kicked the hatch open and burst inside, plasma carbine in hand. What he found chilled him more than any storm on Kesserik. The listening post wasn't a relay station, it was a lab. Biocages lined the walls, some empty, some still humming, all reeking of loss. In the center, an unfinished prototype collar. Not for dragons, for humans. Darren stared at it in silence, fists clenching. He reached out, then stopped. Behind him, heavy claws scraped across the floor. Varos stepped inside, shoulders brushing the curved walls, his body too big for the hallway, his presence too vast for containment. "This isn't just about you anymore," Darren muttered. "They're preparing for rebellion." A console behind them lit up. A hologram flickered to life. A face, pale, sharp, cold. General Corborn, one of the Empress's war architects. "You've made quite the myth out of that beast," he said, voice echoing like ice. "But dragons don't bring peace, they burn it. And you're the spark that needs putting out." The projection dissolved into static. Darren looked to Varos. "They want a war." Varos tilted his head. Then, with one massive claw, he shattered the console. Darren exhaled. "Let's give them one they'll remember." They planted charges, blew the lab to hell, and disappeared into the stars. But not quietly. Before they left, Darren uploaded a message across the abandoned relay channels. Not a speech, just 7 words. "We are not yours to chain anymore." The signal rippled outward, bouncing off derelicts and scrapped satellites, reaching far beyond the outer systems. And the universe, so long silent under the Empire's heel, began to whisper again. They didn't have a fleet. They didn't have allies. They had a dragon. They had a mechanic. And they had a fire the Empire couldn't understand. The Empire didn't answer with a message. They answered with a threat, etched into the hull of a derelict cruiser and dropped into orbit above Kesseric's sister moon. "Return the beast, or we burn the moon you saved him on." Darren read the warning in silence. Varos sat beside him on the ridge, still and unblinking. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. "They still think this is about you," Darren said finally. "They don't get it." He stood, staring at the stars above. "It's about us." That night, they launched for the heart of Empire space. Not to preed, to burn. The core array was the pulse of the Empire. A city-sized orbital station wrapped around a red dwarf star, guarded by a lattice of AI-controlled turrets and defense arms that could vaporize fleets. But Darren knew its design. Back when he was just a maintenance grunt, he'd studied its schematics, dreaming of changing the system from within. Now he would end it from the outside. Ember 1 decloaked just beneath the gravity blind spot, too close for radar. Darren flew on instinct, hand tight on the throttle. Varos launched from the cargo bay, wings folded tight, body a spear of vengeance. Alarms shrieked. Turrets spun to life. But they were too late. Varos cut through drones and cannons like a storm made flesh, his fire painting the vacuum in gold and white. Darren landed on one of the upper pylons and sprinted toward the uplink terminal, virus drive strapped to his back. He dodged patrols, shot through locks, and slammed the data core into place. Not a virus, a truth bomb. Footage, coordinates, names, every chained creature, every black site lab, every neural collar prototype. Years of Empire sins, unburied in seconds. Outside, Varos hovered, bleeding, battered, wings cracked, still flying. "Now!" Darren shouted. The dragon inhaled. Then he exhaled. A blast like a dying star erupted from his chest, ripping through the command dome and tearing the signal spine in half. The core array exploded, and across the stars 1,000 locked channels burst open. The galaxy listened, and the galaxy trembled, but it wasn't over. From the dead edge of space in a derelict system with no sun, they came. A fleet, and at its center, Judicator's crown, the Empress's obsidian flagship. No more messages, no more proxies. Empress Farah herself had come to end this. Her fleet outnumbered any hope. But Darren and Varos didn't wait for the storm. They flew into it. Missiles, drones, heat seekers, EMPs. Varos dove through them all, fire trailing from every wound. Darren locked to his back, pulse rifle strapped across his harness. Then the cage opened. Another dragon. Sleek, silver. A machine in shape and hate, forged to kill its own kind. They collided mid-flight. Claws, fangs, fire, pain. Varos faltered. The actuator tore. Darren reached into his emergency pack and activated the last override. "Do it," he whispered, and Varos ignited. From his chest to his claws to the cracks in his wings, light poured out like a second sun. His entire body became fire. The enemy dragons screamed and disintegrated midair. Judicator's crown tried to retreat. Too late. Varos landed on it, claws first, and ripped into the hole like vengeance made real. The Empress fled. Later, on a drifting asteroid, Darren stood beside the dragon. They had no fleet, but they had something bigger. The story. And across the galaxy, the name Varos became legend. The Ember Sentinel, and beside him always, the mechanic who gave him a name.